Welcome back to Eruptz. If you walked through the streets of Plymouth today, you'd find something deeply unsettling. Traffic lights still hang at intersections, frozen in time. Store signs peek through layers of hardened ash. Church steeples rise like gravestones from a sea of gray volcanic debris that's swallowed entire neighborhoods up to their rooftops. This isn't an abandoned movie set or some post-apocalyptic theme park. This is Plymouth, the former capital of Montserrat, a city that was once the beating heart of a thriving Caribbean island, and it's been completely deserted since 1997. If you're fascinated by the raw power of nature and want to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. At first glance, you might wonder what could possibly cause an entire capital city to be abandoned so completely that even today, over 25 years later, it remains off limits to the public. The answer lies just a few miles away, looming over the buried city like a sleeping giant that never truly went back to sleep. The Soufriere Hills Volcano, and the story of how this volcano destroyed not just Plymouth but roughly 70% of an entire island, is a tale of miscalculation, tragedy, and a community that was forced to watch their home disappear beneath rivers of fire and ash. But here's the thing about Montserrat's volcanic nightmare. It didn't happen overnight. This wasn't like Mount St. Helens, where one catastrophic explosion changed everything in minutes. No, the destruction of Montserrat was slow, agonizing, and terrifyingly unpredictable. It was a disaster that unfolded over years, giving people just enough hope that things might get better, only to rip that hope away again and again. And on June 25, 1997, the volcano delivered its most devastating blow yet, one that would permanently alter the island's geography, economy, and the lives of thousands of people who called Montserrat home. Montserrat, often called the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, was a small slice of paradise. Just 39 square miles of lush green mountains, pristine beaches, and friendly communities. Before 1995, about 12,000 people lived on this British overseas territory, most of them concentrated in and around Plymouth, the bustling capital city on the island's southwestern coast. The city had everything a small Caribbean capital needed: government buildings, schools, a hospital, the island's only port, and George's, the popular seaside restaurant where locals and tourists gathered to watch the sunset over the Caribbean Sea. Life in Montserrat moved at a slower, gentler pace than the world beyond its shores. Tourism was growing. The island had even earned a reputation as a recording destination, with AIR Studios Montserrat attracting major artists like the Police, Paul McCartney, and Elton John. The economy was modest but stable, and the community was tight-knit in the way only small island populations can be. Everyone knew everyone. Your neighbor's problems were your problems. Your victories were celebrated by the whole village. But beneath this tranquil surface, something ancient was stirring. The Soufriere Hills volcano, which dominates the southern half of the island, had been dormant for centuries. So dormant, in fact, that most residents didn't think of it as a threat at all. It was just part of the landscape, a green mountain covered in forest and farmland. Some people even built homes on its lower slopes, never imagining that the peaceful hillside they called home was actually a ticking time bomb. The Caribbean sits on an extremely active tectonic boundary where the Atlantic plate slides beneath the Caribbean plate. This process, called subduction, creates the perfect conditions for volcanic activity. And while other Caribbean islands like St. Lucia and St. Vincent had more obviously active volcanoes, Montserrat's Soufriere Hills had been quiet for so long that it had faded from the collective consciousness. That all changed on July 18, 1995. It started with earthquakes. Small ones at first, barely noticeable tremors that most people brushed off as nothing unusual. But by mid-July 1995, the frequency and intensity increased. Something was happening deep beneath the Soufriere Hills, and scientists were starting to pay attention. On July 18th, the volcano produced its first phreatic eruption, a steam-driven explosion caused by groundwater coming into contact with a hot volcanic rock. Ash clouds rose into the sky, and suddenly, the dormant mountain that nobody worried about became the center of everyone's attention. Within days, the Montserrat Volcano Observatory was established, bringing in volcanologists from around the world to monitor the situation. Their equipment detected magma rising through the volcano's interior, pushing toward the surface. This wasn't just a brief episode of unrest. The volcano was waking up after nearly 400 years of silence, and nobody could predict what would happen next. At first, the eruptions were relatively small. Ash fell on nearby communities, coating cars and gardens in a fine gray powder. The smell of sulfur hung in the air. But life continued, and many residents refused to evacuate. This was their home. Where were they supposed to go? The initial response from authorities was measured. Evacuation orders were issued for the most at-risk areas closest to the volcano, but many people in Plymouth and other parts of the South felt safe enough to stay. Then came the pyroclastic flows. These are among the most deadly volcanic phenomena on Earth. Unlike lava, which moves slowly and predictably, pyroclastic flows are superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and rock that can reach temperatures of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and speeds over 100 miles per hour. They incinerate everything in their path, and they're nearly impossible to outrun. The first significant pyroclastic flow from Soufriere Hills occurred in April 1996, destroying several villages in the volcano's immediate vicinity. Still, Plymouth remained standing. The capital was far enough away that many believed it would be spared. Authorities created exclusion zones, areas too dangerous for anyone to enter. But the zones kept changing as the volcano's behavior became more unpredictable. One week it would be safe to return home. The next week, a new surge of activity would force another evacuation. Life on Montserrat between 1995 and 1997 became an exhausting cycle of hope and fear. Families were split between those who evacuated to the north or left the island entirely, and those who refused to abandon their homes in the south. The economy suffered. Tourism dried up completely. Who wants to vacation on an island with an active volcano? Businesses closed. The recording studio shut down. Many residents who had the means left for the UK, the US, or other Caribbean islands, scattering the close-knit community that had defined Montserrat for generations. But for those who stayed, normalcy became a moving target. Schools in the danger zone closed, forcing children to commute to the north or stop attending altogether. Farmers watched their crops wither under constant ashfall. The air quality degraded so badly that respiratory problems became widespread, especially among the elderly and children. And still, the volcano continued its unpredictable pattern of activity. Days of relative calm would be shattered by sudden eruptions that sent massive ash columns kilometers into the atmosphere. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine trying to sleep when you know that a pyroclastic flow could come crashing down the mountain at any moment. Imagine packing a bag every night just in case you need to flee before dawn. For nearly 2 years, this was the reality for thousands of people, and the stress fractured the community. Arguments broke out over evacuation policies. Some accused the government of overreacting, others claimed they weren't doing enough. Scientists became targets of frustration when their predictions didn't match what actually happened. The truth is, volcanoes are incredibly difficult to predict with precision. Volcanologists could see that magma was rising, that dome collapses were becoming more frequent and more violent, but pinpointing exactly when and where the next major pyroclastic flow would occur was nearly impossible. The Soufriere Hills volcano was writing its own rules, and everyone on the island was forced to react rather than prepare. By mid-1997, the situation had reached a critical point. The volcanic dome, a massive plug of hardened lava that had been growing inside the crater, had become dangerously unstable. The morning of June 25, 1997, started like many others during that period of unrest. Hot, humid, with a haze of volcanic ash lingering in the air. But something felt different. The volcano had been particularly active in the preceding days, and scientists at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory were on high alert. Seismic readings showed increased activity deep within the mountain. The lava dome had grown to an enormous size, and sections of it were starting to collapse under their own weight. Around 12:50 p.m., it happened. A massive section of the lava dome collapsed catastrophically, triggering the largest and most devastating pyroclastic flow the island had seen. The superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and rock tore down the mountain's southeastern flank at terrifying speed, moving like a liquid wall of destruction. Within seconds, it reached the village of Streatham. Within minutes, it had swept through several other communities. 19 people were killed that day. Most of them were farmers and residents who had stayed in the exclusion zone either because they refused to leave their land or because they believed the immediate danger had passed. Some had returned briefly to tend to crops or check on property. Others simply had nowhere else to go. The pyroclastic flow gave them no chance. The temperatures were so extreme that bodies were never recovered, vaporized, or buried under meters of volcanic debris. But the destruction didn't stop with the initial flow. The collapse triggered a series of secondary pyroclastic flows throughout the afternoon and evening. These cascaded down multiple valleys, spreading devastation across an even wider area. Entire villages that had survived earlier eruptions were now completely buried. Roads were obliterated, power lines were torn apart, and the ash cloud that rose from these flows was so massive that it plunged the island into darkness even in the middle of the day. It was like somebody screaming at the top of lungs into your ear. That's how survivors described the sound of the pyroclastic flows, a roar so loud and so deep that it seemed to vibrate through your entire body. While June 25th marked the deadliest day of the eruption, it wasn't the end of Plymouth. In fact, the capital had survived relatively intact up to that point, spared by the direction of the earlier flows. But the eruption that day was a turning point. It proved that nowhere in the south was truly safe. The exclusion zone was expanded dramatically, and Plymouth, already partially evacuated, was placed completely off limits. Over the following weeks and months, the volcano continued its assault. Pyroclastic flows became more frequent, and many of them were directed toward the west, straight toward Plymouth. On August 4, 1997, a series of flows reached the outskirts of the capital for the first time. The city's eastern neighborhoods were hit first, buildings crushed and buried under the weight of volcanic material. Then came the ash. Not the light dusting that had fallen before, but heavy, cement-like deposits that accumulated in layers several meters deep. By the end of 1997, much of Plymouth was unrecognizable. The port, which had been the island's economic lifeline, was destroyed. The government buildings were buried. Schools, churches, homes, all disappeared beneath the relentless flow of volcanic debris. And this wasn't a sudden catastrophic burial like Pompeii. It happened slowly, agonizingly, as residents watched from the north, powerless to stop the destruction of everything they had built. Photographs from this period are haunting. You can see rooftops barely visible above the gray wasteland, the dome of a church poking through like a drowning man's hand reaching for air. Street signs twisted and half buried, and the silence. A city that had once buzzed with life now sat in eerie stillness, accessible only to scientists with special permission and protective gear. The psychological impact of watching your capital city die cannot be overstated. For the people of Montserrat, Plymouth wasn't just a collection of buildings. It was their history, their identity, their connection to generations past. By the end of 1997, the population of Montserrat had been cut in half. Over 6,000 people had left the island, most of them never to return. The UK government, responsible for this British overseas territory, facilitated evacuations and offered resettlement assistance. Families arrived in London, Manchester, and Birmingham with nothing but a few suitcases and memories of the home they'd lost. Others relocated to nearby Caribbean islands like Antigua, where refugee camps were established to handle the influx. But leaving wasn't easy, and many who stayed in the north did so out of sheer stubbornness and love for their island. The northern third of Montserrat, furthest from the volcano, became the new center of life. A makeshift capital was established in Bradiz. New infrastructure had to be built from scratch. Schools, clinics, government offices all had to be relocated or constructed in areas that had previously been rural farmland. The island's economy, already devastated by the loss of Plymouth and the collapse of tourism, struggled to find footing. International aid poured in, but it wasn't enough to replace what had been lost. The airport was gone. buried under volcanic debris, making travel to and from the island incredibly difficult. Supply chains were disrupted, food and medicine had to be brought in by helicopter or boat, and the volcano wasn't finished. Throughout the late 1990s and into the 2000s, Soufriere Hills continued to erupt sporadically, keeping the southern two-thirds of the island in a permanent exclusion zone. For those who stayed, resilience became a daily practice. They rebuilt their lives in the shadow of the volcano that had taken everything. They created new communities, new traditions, new ways of defining what it meant to be Montserratian. But the loss lingered. Every family had someone who had left. Every conversation eventually circled back to memories of Plymouth, of the way things used to be. And still, the volcano continued to shape their reality, a constant reminder that nature, when provoked, is far more powerful than anything humans can build. Today, more than 25 years after the devastating eruptions of 1997, Montserrat is a very different place. The population hovers around 5,000 people, less than half of what it was before the volcano awoke. The southern two-thirds of the island, including all of Plymouth, remains an exclusion zone. Accessing the buried capital requires special permission, and even then it's dangerous. The volcano is still active, with occasional dome collapses and pyroclastic flows, reminding everyone that Soufriere Hills is far from finished. In fact, significant eruptions occurred as recently as 2010, proving that this is not a threat that will simply fade away. But there is beauty in resilience. The northern part of the island has been rebuilt with stunning determination. New housing developments, schools, and even a small airport have been constructed. The government relocated to temporary facilities in the Braids and later to Little Bay, which is being developed as the new capital. Roads have been paved. Businesses have reopened. Life has found a way to continue, even under the constant shadow of the volcano. And perhaps most remarkably, a sense of community has been rebuilt among those who chose to stay or who have returned after years away. Tourism has returned in a different form. Visitors now come specifically to see the volcano and the buried city, to witness the raw power of nature frozen in time. Helicopter tours fly over Plymouth, giving passengers an aerial view of the ash-covered streets and half-buried buildings. The Jack Boy Hill viewing platform offers a safe vantage point to observe the volcano and the exclusion zone stretching out below. It's become a form of dark tourism, yes, but it's also an educational experience that helps the world understand what happened here and why volcanic monitoring is so crucial. The Montserrat Volcano Observatory continues its work, monitoring every tremor and gas emission, providing early warnings that save lives. The scientists there have become some of the world's leading experts on dome collapse volcanoes, and their research has helped improve volcanic hazard assessment globally. What happened on Montserrat has informed evacuation protocols and monitoring systems on other volcanic islands around the world. The story of Montserrat is not just one of destruction. It's a story of survival, adaptation, and the unbreakable spirit of a community that refused to let a volcano erase their identity. The people who stayed have built something new from the ashes, quite literally. They've created festivals celebrating their heritage, cultural events that keep traditions alive, and economic initiatives designed to honor the past while building toward a future that acknowledges the volcano's presence without being paralyzed by fear. Plymouth, the ghost capital, stands as a memorial. Its buried streets and ash-covered buildings are a stark reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. Traffic lights still dangle from poles, frozen at whatever color they displayed when the power finally cut out. Store signs advertise sales that will never happen. The clock on the government building stopped at the exact moment the pyroclastic flows overwhelmed it. And for the Montserratians scattered around the world, in London, New York, Toronto, and beyond, Plymouth represents a homeland that still exists in memory, even if it can never be physically reclaimed. The island was fundamentally reshaped by the eruptions, its geography rewritten by fire and ash. Coastlines changed as pyroclastic flows extended the land into the sea. Valleys were filled with hundreds of feet of volcanic debris. Mountains were rebuilt in different shapes. But the heart of Montserrat, the spirit of its people, survived. And that might be the most important lesson from this disaster. Buildings can be buried, cities can be abandoned, landscapes can be transformed beyond recognition. but a community's identity, forged through shared struggle and collective memory, is far harder to destroy. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the forces that shape our world, do us a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more incredible stories of nature's power and human resilience. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next eruption.